In an airstrike aimed at killing one of the leaders of the terrorist attack from October 7th, Israel causes serious civilian casualties, while a plan surfaces calling for the deportation of the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. We'll talk about this and the developments along the front lines in Israel's war against Hamas. Hello and welcome. We'll start with the Gaza Strip itself here. Fire from the Gaza Strip with missiles and mortars is continuing, and according at least to the number of instances, it seems to be more or less stable to the previous days. The Israelis continue to advance south here along the coast, pushing forward further, while from the center, where they had already blocked the main road connecting the north with the south, they are now advancing further to the west, obviously aimed at reaching the Mediterranean Sea and split the Gaza Strip in half. We have visual evidence that the fighting is going on fairly close to the shore already. Obviously, in detail, we don't know whether it's cut off yet, but it seems to be the clear plan of what Israel intends, and it seems to be about to happen. Israel has now confirmed that the private Uri Magidish, who was freed, who was one of the abducted persons from the terrorist attack, was actually freed with special forces and Shin Bet, the intelligence agency. It wasn't released in some circumstance, but the position of the soldier was obviously found out with the intelligence agencies, who then led a special forces unit to free her. We have here a video where we can see some of the challenges Israel is facing while they are here in the inside of the Gaza Strip. And this is an impressive sight of how intense the fighting and the bombing had been before. And as you can see, the opportunities for ambushes are massive inside of urban combat, as the threat comes from all dimensions, above, below, and all sides, as we can see here. The Israel also has confirmed that by now they have lost 16 soldiers inside of the Gaza Strip. At least 16 Israeli soldiers have died during those combat operations inside here. And now there was an airstrike against the Jabalia refugee camp, or the former refugee camp close to Jabalia, in which Israel was using at least 4 bunker-busting bombs to strike a tunnel system in which the Hamas leader Ibrahim Biari was hiding, together with a higher number of other Hamas fighters. I think Israel is saying that they killed 21 other fighters next to him. Because of the high value of the target, as Biari was one of the leaders and planners of October 7th, Israel did not issue a warning to the civilians this time, and this supposedly led to a serious amount of civilian casualties, as the civilians were not prepared for the airstrike, thus not allowing Biari to flee, as Israel would have announced that they identified his position. The tunnel system that was struck was apparently under and in between civilian areas, in civilian residential areas, and this was one of the reasons that led to casualties. In an interview, Hamas speaker Musa Abu Marzouk said the tunnels are for Hamas members. For the protection of the civilians is the responsibility of the United Nations, and thus, while Hamas has constructed more than 500 kilometers of reinforced tunnels, supposedly up to 60 meters below the ground, there's not a single air raid shelter being constructed by Hamas at the same time. Hamas has also presented a submarine, or a underwater device that is likely aimed at striking naval targets from Israel. That is here a torpedo written with a B on it, as you can see here, and it seems to be close to the surface, probably working with a snorkel. H.I. Sutton has done a nice analysis about this, in case you're interested, on navalnews.com, I think it was. H.I. Sutton, you'll find him yourself if you Google his name. Egypt has now opened the Rafah border crossing, at least for the time being, for heavily wounded persons and people inside of Gaza with foreign passports. A fair number, I was reading about roughly 200 persons, was already being allowed to leave the Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, IDF has now arrested 1,180 Palestinians. 740 of them are Hamas members, while the Islamic Jihad commander of Jenin was just killed by the Israeli armed forces as well. Even though there are some additional issues, Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence agency, is warning the government that violence perpetrated by the settlers could cause additional problems, as there are clashes between settlers and Palestinians in the past weeks, and even Shin Bet says not all of them are self-defense, while obviously the claims by the pro-settler factions are that this is mostly self-defense. Not all of them are, and Shin Bet sees issues that this might heat up the situation further and destabilize the region further. In the north, here in the border towards Syria and Lebanon, fighting is continuing, but at a more or less stable level. Islamic Jihad said they did an infiltration attempt, but admit that 2 of their fighters have been killed during this attempt. And the Syrian Arab army had struck the Golan Heights with missiles. Israel has responded and struck the 112th Brigade of the 112th Brigade of the Syrian Arab armies in response. The Iranian proxies are still doing attacks on US troops inside of Iraq and Syria, keeping a steady level of small-scale attacks to keep up the pressure against the US, while the US is sending THAAD and Patriot systems to basically every base they have in the region. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, everywhere where the US are being sent air defense systems that are capable of shooting down ballistic missiles as well, in case the fighting intensifies, especially if Iran should get involved. The Israeli Air Force is reporting that they shot down a ballistic missile over the Red Sea. This was clearly coming from Yemen, as the Yemeniti Houthis had declared war on Israel. The Houthis are a faction inside of the civil war, so while there were some reports that Yemen declared war, this simply isn't true. The Houthis are a rebel faction that is in alliance with Iran, and they have declared war towards Israel, not the state of Yemen itself. Israel has apparently, an Israeli ministry has drafted a concept proposal for transfer of Gazan civilians to Egypt. Obviously, transfer is a euphemism for the deportation, and if we say what it is, it would be ethnic cleansing. So this draft paper, and we need to stick as closely to the facts as possible in this case, this draft paper was done by the intelligence ministry, and it discussed 3 potential options what could be done with the Gaza Strip once Israel is done with Hamas inside of Gaza Strip. Option 1, it was to hand it over to the Palestinian Authority. This was considered to be unlikely to be successful for the many reasons we talked about in the past. Option B would be to create a new government. They also didn't consider it to be very having good prospect of succeeding. And option 3 was basically deportation. Only the option 3 or option C was considered to be effective, and this shouldn't be any surprise to any observer that thinks rationally. Obviously, for Israel, the best solution is if the problem of Gaza simply disappears, and the only way to make it disappear is to make the Gazans disappear. That doesn't mean it would be legal. This is also obvious. It would be ethnic cleansing. It would be against various international laws that Israel probably has acknowledged to uphold. And we can see, and this is why we need to see to the wording here. It was a draft paper by a ministry. It was not a decision by the government. It was basically a ministry doing its job, saying those are options that we have. That those options are highly controversial. We already see that it was leaked. It's highly unlikely that it was just forgotten somewhere and a cleaning lady found it and took it home. This is a sign that somebody inside of the ministry was so outraged by the draft paper that he supplied it to the public. And before something like this becomes more than a draft paper, the government has to take the choice to actually fulfill the draft paper. Now, if we try to look at unemotional and outside of moral boundaries and outside of legal boundaries, then obviously getting rid of every Palestinian in Gaza is the best solution for Israel, because if there is nobody anymore, then nobody can attack them and nobody can shoot missiles. That ministry comes to that conclusion. It shouldn't be much of a surprise, but that doesn't mean that the government will actually do it and that this will actually be fulfilled. So this has to be seen in the context that this was more or less writing down possible options that they thought about. There are some claims that the ministry is like not really powerful and not really important, and it's used to park radical members of Likud party that can't be get rid of, and they need to be rewarded, but they need to be put aside. I don't really know the internal mechanisms. This might be true, this might not be true, but the fact is it was a draft paper and it was leaked because obviously somebody was outraged. The likelihood of it being fulfilled is very, very low, at least to what I would expect, as this would cause serious political repercussions towards Israel from the rest of the world, including the Arab world. This would cause a lot of problems for the Arab governments that have now recognized Israel to keep up that recognition, as a second Nakba would basically happen, and this would put pressure on the governments as well. So whether Israel actually would do it is a whole different story as well. And we have finally a message that, according to Bloomberg, the US and Israel are talking about peacekeepers as another option. US, UK, and French troops should be peacekeepers inside of the Gaza Strip. Another option would be the United Nations oversight. This seems unlikely, as the Israeli experiences with the United Nations isn't very great, and basically whoever takes over the Gaza Strip needs to take responsibility to prevent further attacks, and whether the UN is capable of doing this and willing of doing this is a whole different story, while Israeli counterstrikes after attacks that happened regardless might endanger and kill UN peacekeepers inside of the Gaza Strip. And this was now talking about the memorandum by the intelligence ministry, but I guess we also need to talk about the strike on the camp inside Gaza, on the strike of in Jabalia. When I was serving in the German army, we wouldn't talk, I guess, out of political correctness and pacifism. We wouldn't do theoretical exercises with real countries. We would call them blue land and red land. So let's move all of this aside from the political sphere and just stick to the theoretical. Imagine a case that blue land gets attacked by red land, and red land comes into blue land and slaughters as many civilians as they can get before retreating back to red land with several hundred hostages that are mostly civilians. In both cases, the victims are mostly civilians. Blue land obviously says we're going to strike back and we're going to hold them accountable. And then they say the civilians need to vacate parts of red land, so there will be no civilian casualties when we hold the red land troops accountable. Now, after that, the civilians don't flee. Whether they don't flee because of choosing to do so, or whether they are forced by red land forces, is in general more or less irrelevant. It doesn't change anything about the fact that it happens. And this leads to tough choices by blue land. What should they do? Should they basically say, okay, I guess we had bad luck, so let's go home and not do anything? Or should they say, we gave them all the chance, now every civilian death is the choice and is the responsibility of Redland? You can decide for yourself what you think is a reasonable approach if we're talking about a theoretical scenario that does not involve the historically loaded and politically loaded partners or opponents, let's rather say opponents in this conflict here. But I see the dilemma that Israel faces here as Hamas forces hide among civilians. It's proven, it's fact that their military installations are among civilians, are under civilian objects, are even under schools, UN installations and hospitals. And if those aren't evacuated, what choice does Israel have to either strike them regardless or not strike them at all? And at which point is it reasonable to demand from Israel not to strike at all, despite what has happened, despite who is there? I'll leave the choice to you. Write it in the comment section. What do you think the right measurements here are, especially if we talk about blue land and red land, and try not to put the actual context into this to try to avoid political repercussions or political influencing our own decisions. Write it in the comment sections what you think should be the right choice to do here. This video, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up regardless, despite the tough topics. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. I'm going to publish a situation report about the war in Ukraine as well today. So if you haven't seen it yet, it should be published like half an hour after this video is published. If you haven't seen it yet, go over there and check it out. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.